Welcome back. You're watching News Centre. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has said that the rapid growth of e-commerce companies is not a matter of pride, but a matter of concern. Speaking at an event in Delhi, Goyal said that while the e-commerce sector is crucial, its growing dominance needs to be carefully managed. He also raised the red flag on the rise in predatory pricing and the negative impact of e-commerce boom on India's retail sector.
Are we going to cause huge social disruption with this massive growth of e-commerce? And I don't see it a matter of pride that half our market could possibly become a part of the e-commerce network 10 years from now. It's a matter of concern. But I'm not wishing away e-commerce. It's there to stay. But I don't deny that e-commerce has a role. But we'll have to think very carefully and cautiously what that role is, how that role can be in a more organized fashion. Is predatory pricing policies good for the country?
Let me go across to Praveen Khandelwal, BJP MP from Chandni Chowk and Secretary General at Confederation of All India Traders. He's joining us now. Nikhil, Pahwa, editor at Medianama, and also Ajay, former Secretary in the Ministry of Commerce, also with us. Mr. Khandelwal, thank you very much for joining us. Now, the e-commerce policy is something that traders in the country and members and heads of bodies like yours had been demanding for quite some time. This e-commerce policy has been in discussion since 2019. Are you expecting the government to roll it out anytime soon?
Well, first of all, I would like to compliment Union Commerce Minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal, who has very nicely articulated the emergence of e-commerce in the country in context of the small retailers. Of course, we are not against e-commerce, but there has to be a level playing field. And of course, the rolling out of e-commerce policy has become need of the hour, and to the best of my knowledge, prior to the general elections, the government has completed the phase of discussions and enormous discussions on this subject with all stakeholders. And as far as my knowledge is concerned, there was a unanimity among all stakeholders, including the e-commerce platforms, for e-commerce policy and the rules under Consumer Affairs Ministry. So I strongly feel that now the time has come when, after expressing concern by Shri Piyush Goyal, the e-commerce policy and the rules should be rolled out so as to negate the feeling among the small traders about the threat they are receiving from e-commerce players who are flouting the FDI policy and indulging into predatory pricing, loss funding, and owing inventory.
But very quickly, before we move on to other panelists, what do you think is leading to the delay in implementation of the policy? We believe it's been ready for 7 to 8 months now.
Because the general elections came up in between, and today, after the expression of Shri Piyush Goyal ji on the threats and the enormous discussions that were held in past months, I think policy may be ruled out, may be rolled out anytime now.
All right. So you're expecting the policy anytime now. Let me go across to Mr. Dua. Mr. Dua, thank you very much for waiting patiently. What's your view? The sense that we're getting is that the discussions on this e-commerce policy are done. Stakeholder consultations are done. The final presentation and final proposal is awaiting approval from the top level in the government. Now, what do you think may be holding back the government?
I think an obvious reason for not rolling out the policy, which has been in the works for quite some time, is that there are differences of opinion still persist between the stakeholders. Those could well be between what the minister stated and what Mr. Khandelwal so eloquently put, and he's been talking about it for years together, even before because he's been heading this organization for quite some time, that there is threat of e-commerce, organized trade upon retailers, particularly the ones who are not organized. This has been stated vociferously in the past when FDI was to be allowed in retail trade, which was the same set of arguments came up there, and it took quite some time for the government to actually open up FDI in the form as we see it today. So the policy on e-commerce, which has been talked of and which should have been in position 5 years ago, or if not longer, ever since we allowed organized trade to come into e-commerce, and including foreign companies. So there are differences, and those differences need to be ironed out before the policy can get announced. And I can see it that two or three sets of differences which might be there. One is the impact on the retail trade, the extensive retail trade in the country, which is one of the biggest employers, probably the biggest after agriculture. Second, there are differences also on how to ensure that the benefits of opening up, and if foreign companies like the Amazon, I'm naming it because it has a dominant presence in the Indian market, how they are going to be benefiting the Indian economy rather than benefiting themselves, their stakeholders overseas. That also needs to be resolved, and in that we have to be looking at how can the Indian MSMEs benefit and join the e-commerce bandwagon, both in India as well as in the export trade. So these considerations, important as for economy as well as social scene, we need to consider. We need to thrash out thoroughly before moving. Thank you.
Okay. So this is what the government may be concerned about and maybe delaying the final implementation of the policy. Nikhil Pahwa, to get you in at this stage, in 2020 also, Piyush Goyal, the Commerce Minister, had made some scathing remarks on Amazon that you're not doing any favor by investing $1 billion in India. And today he expressed concern about the rapid rise of e-commerce and its impact on small retailers in the country. And what are they doing in terms of predatory pricing and leading to large-scale sale of their products in the country? How do you see these statements at a time when we are trying to attract investments from abroad?
Actually, Parikshit, Mr. Khandelwal, who you have over here, has been at the forefront of pushing back against foreign retailers in the country and their violation of Press Note 3, which basically restricts foreign companies from doing multi-brand retail in India. And companies have found loopholes around it. I think it's time that the government steps up, and I agree with Mr. Khandelwal and Mr. Dualia. We need to basically plug those loopholes so that the law of the land prevails. That needs to be addressed. Secondly, predatory pricing is a problem in the market, and I think predatory pricing also needs to be addressed. And we have competition laws to address issues related to predatory pricing. But those are meant for dominant players. And right now we have Flipkart and you can say we have Flipkart and Amazon that are dominant. But I don't think that situation of dominant remains anymore, because they are being challenged significantly. Quick commerce companies like, for example, by Zomato, which is a listed Indian company, they have Blinkit, which is challenging these previously dominant players in different markets. So the e-commerce space by itself is changing, it is evolving, and therefore the policy that we're looking at, which has been in the works since 2016, is now frankly outdated. I don't think there's been a public consultation on this policy. There might have been stakeholder consultations, but this impacts consumers and users as well. And so I think the government needs to do a public consultation, because the environment has changed drastically. In the last 8 months itself, the e-commerce environment in this country has changed drastically. Mr. Goyal also made a point about jobs.
Right.
And I think I have a point of disagreement there, because the threat is that e-commerce has taken away jobs from traditional retailers. But look at the number of online merchants that have come on, that have are selling online, that are importing products and selling or buying from manufacturers. Look at the number of D2C brands which have come into play. So how can you argue that e-commerce actually hasn't created jobs? So you have to weigh the pros and cons, but you also have to look at the realistic picture, not only from the perspective of traditional retailers, but also online retailers who've actually built businesses, online brands which have been created purely because of the existence of e-commerce. So look, it's not 2016, it's not even 2020 anymore. The last thing I wanted to add is that e-commerce for consumers like me have been fantastic. Like, we've got access to products which we wouldn't have got access to earlier. So we've got greater diversity of products, but also greater diversity of distribution. With smaller towns which never had that option and they used to pay a premium for products from cities, now have access to products at the same price as people in cities and more products. So it's benefited consumers. So do we really, I think there needs to be a complete rethink of the e-commerce policy now.
All right, so there needs to be a rethink. Mr. Khandelwal, very quickly, have you seen any final draft of the policy so far, or nothing beyond what was released in 2019?
No, I had just seen the PowerPoint presentation, which was made in August 2023 by the government. And I think and most of the stakeholders, including the e-commerce companies, the other service providers, everybody was present in that meeting, and everybody agreed unanimously on the contours of the policy and the rules. So I think there is a unanimity among all these stakeholders, and therefore we can have a fresh look, and as soon as the policy and the rules are notified, I think this debate on e-commerce will certainly come to an end. My final comment is that e-commerce for whom? The mandate of FDI policy is for the